Hello, my name's Mike Nelson. We're in my studio in Crystal Palace in South London. I'm an artist who's probably best known for rebuilding buildings years ago or building fictional spaces, but more recently perhaps more sculptural works. You know, objects are kind of imbued with a certain power in themselves, in their very actuality. And when we surround ourselves with them, there is a certain osmosis. It's a complex and complicated relationship, which I'm not completely kind of in control of, but at the same time trying to make sense. In every work I've made, every piece of wood that you can see, and every object has been sourced and found, by me. Not, I don't send a load of people out in vans to go and collect it and you say, I want a bunch of this or a bunch of that. I wander around and to the salvage yards and to the markets and, find it and, make sure that that's what I want for that particular space or place. It's an interesting life, but even though half the time I spend it as a builder, but I look like a builder and I behave like a builder, sort of, to some degree. But ultimately, sort of, my head doesn't know that. My head's somewhere else. The question about the object when it becomes sculpture and when it's not sculpture, it's one of those things where it kind of doesn't matter, but it completely matters. And it's that oscillation between those two things that make it interesting ultimately. It's utter inconsequence and it's utter importance. Everybody likes to sort of trespass into spaces they're not meant to go into somehow. And that sort of just curiosity of what lays beyond the door or down a corridor, it's quite strong in many people, I think. And I think that sense, sort of like you almost forget that that sort of rather, I'm in an art gallery, I'm looking at art, kind of, I have to think about it in a certain way. I have to be sort of like, is sometimes lost when you're in those, replicated spaces. So the larger, more sort of like, labyrinthine kind of built set-like works, you become the sort of the player, and your body and movement, I suppose, activates, and decisions within those spaces activates the work itself. And in that sense, I think you actually start to forget you're looking at art sometimes. I think it became very clear to me the idea of perhaps creating a scenario where there's a kind of glitch in reality. This construction of a space purely for you as the viewer, as the visitor, to enter into, was actually quite a strong and sort of emotive thing to do, because in a way your eyes seeing something which is a replicant of what we normally experience. But because you knew it didn't exist before and it's been built for this purpose for you to enter, the sort of sense of unreality is quite kind of aggravating. Obviously, these really huge ones I build and then they're demolished. So there's a huge amount. Often it takes longer to build them than they're actually up for. So, which is kind of slightly perverse ultimately. But then, if it's done in a very visible place and many people visit, then obviously the memories of that work are dispersed all around the place. And I still have people who actually sort of describe spaces that they thought they'd been in, which were mine, which weren't, because their memory somehow has annexed sort of their own experience into the experience of going into one of the found spaces, which is kind of a success, I think, of sorts. Ultimately, there is a visceral physicality to the things that I have made, be they spaces or objects, which have, touched people, in peculiar ways, which I'm very proud of, that I've actually managed to communicate something through such kind of such lowly material. I think the studio is more of a psychological space than a making space or a physical space. And, I enjoy collating objects that perhaps, or material that potentially might be work or might become work, but also may just exist as almost as fellow travellers.